Hey everybody, Portland Chess Shop here to bring you another Chess Shoutcast, and we have Grandmaster Lestri against FIDE Master Roach on the Internet Chess Club. We see that, let me maximize this, we see that Lestri is from Spain and Roach is from Ireland. So quite a match across continents. And this is actually transposed to sort of a French defense position. It started with a Sicilian, but e5 was played, and then because of that, this is like an advanced variation of the French defense. So here, the bishops are being exchanged. So this is a sideline, but it could be good for purple because in the French defense, usually this bishop is the bad bishop because it's blocked in by this really this pawn structure that's like a brick wall. So then this bishop needs to sometimes escape by going over this way after f6 is played, or being traded off just as you saw. So it's good that that was traded off, I think, but purple may have lost time in doing that. So we'll see. But also in this position, white can't castle yet. And now purple has played a tactic because pawn can't take back because the queen and the rook were not connected. So the bishop took the knight, and now the bishop is taken back. The knight comes towards the center. It's good to move your knights out and move them towards the center. That's something that I strongly believe about knights. So the knight comes back. I think it's maybe heading for the queen side. Here, h4 is played. I do like this move. He says, okay, my king can't castle. I'll put my pieces near my king and maybe elevate my rook and try to get a checkmating attack. So you want to set up the rook first and then bring out the queen because the queen is the most powerful piece. So you want to bring that out afterwards. So pawn exchange here. Now this rook is going to come out. That could be good because this f2 square could become weak. I do prefer purple's position, I think, although bishops are good, and it's good that white has a bishop versus two knights, possibly. As the position opens up, the bishop becomes a little stronger. You can see that the bishop is already lined up with this rook and lined up with the g7 square. The knight moves back to where it went, which isn't a good sign. If you move your knight back and forth, it's usually, takes extra time. So the rook's double. This is a strong power down the f-file. And h5 is played. He's going to try to make some weaknesses. Sorry about that. He's going to try to make some weaknesses. Queen e2. So now he's trying to trade off the queens, go into an endgame. I think this makes sense considering that it didn't seem like he was ever going to be able to castle with that queen on a6. That queen was pretty good. So now the queen's been exchanged. The character of the position changes pretty significantly. We're not really thinking about checkmating attacks. We're thinking about trying to promote pawns into queens or win material. Purple will be thinking about trying to break with the e5 move. Now this knight has been pinned. So here the bishop shows its power. The knight comes forward. He is sacrificing exchange, but if it's taken, then the knight checks here, checking both the king and the rook. So he forks on those two squares, and then I guess he takes the rook, and then the bishop takes on g7. I don't know. There's some complications with it, but the king comes to e3. So these rooks have some potential to do something pretty powerful. Now it's attacking this square. This knight is still attacking the d4. This knight is still defending d4. So the rook moves to c2. It's thinking, okay, if this knight moves at some point, then I will want to move this rook down this file, get some activity. Perhaps he could go to f7 if this rook has already moved. So the bishop now retreats, which is interesting, overprotecting the f2 square. So the knight and potentially the two rooks are attacking the square, but now it's defended also 3 times. But now, right after that move, this e5 move that I predicted would be played is now played, and the knight takes. Now, after takes, now this knight moves would create a check, which would be basically devastating. So the king has to move. King moves towards the center, and now it looks like maybe the king could take here, could take on d5. It would be pretty risky, using your king was going forward that much. But we do see that this pawn isn't defended, and that pawn is the only defender of the knight. The rook does come down. Now the king is in some trouble. So the king retreats. He doesn't want to open up the file because now this check is really good because the knight's already defended. So it's like almost mate. The king has to come over here, and then he has a double check for like GG. So the rook comes back. Pawn is played. He's going to have to move the knight. This is pretty precarious, I think. And I think because of that, FM Roach is down on time because his position is precarious, meaning that it's a little bit difficult to play. It's equal right now, but it could fall out of his out of his control very quickly. The pawn on a3 is taken. Now the bishop centralizes itself. He doesn't just take on d5. He centralizes the bishop, attacking g7, forcing the rook to come back, and then takes with the rook. I really like that. I feel like he gained a tempo, and that's really good. So the knight moves here, forking the rook and bishop. So the knight has done something good. He's able to exchange. And so now 4 pawns against 3 pawns. This position, I don't know. This king is so good versus this king that I'm not sure how to judge it. Because you want to centralize your king. This king may be able to take these pawns down. One of the pawns already falls. The pawn keeps pushing. He gets his king in front of it. And now this king can retreat and try to exchange rooks if he chooses. He may defend the pawns. We'll see. Because now this rook is much better placed than the king. Now he has to takes, and now the king tries to save himself. Will he be able to do this? So now it's 2 pawns against 1 pawn, but this pawn can't promote if the king is in front of it. So we will see. This pawn probably can, though. It may be a zugzwang situation, though, where you have to do it at the right timing. And in this sort of time trouble, you have to know how to do it. So pawn. Now we see pawn up. He could just take pawn. Oh, no, he can't take because then there's check. Forcing here, check, here, mate. So then this is GG, this is checkmate. So that's that game. Hey everybody, Portland Chess Shop here to bring you the chess action, and we have another game. Grandmaster Lestri has decided to wake up from his nap and play some more chess. So we'll be following him against White, who's doublish 2-1 AX9 from Sweden. Both are pretty high rated. Doublish is actually the favorite here against his Grandmaster opponent. And we saw an opening. We'll have to go from here. So it's becoming fianchettoed. C6 is played, A4 to attack the knight. So this is played to defend. Both players are playing pretty fast through the opening stages, and it's pretty symmetrical. See how this bishop is probably going to get fianchettoed in the same structure. King comes forward to overprotect this square. Rook comes to the center. Makes sense to me. These knights are pretty good. So it's kind of symmetrical on the king side, and the queen side isn't symmetrical, but it is balanced, I would say. Queen comes here. It's safe here, and it exerts some pressure along this diagonal. So we could see the bishop move and the rook come to the center. This bishop is actually defending h6 and d6 at the same time, which is pretty precarious. Thus, I think that has something to do with the knight moving. But then pawn is played up. Now he's sacrificing the knight. Seems extreme. So he gives up. That's it. But out of rage, he plays again against FIDE Master Trulé. Both players put their knights out. D4 and C4 are played. This becomes it's transferred into King's Indian. C5. Often E5 is played in the King's Indian to attack on the king side. But this time he plays E6. Pawns are exchanged. Strong pawn in the center. So black has a little bit more space, but white has a little bit more space because he controls things like this square and this square. But at the same time, this bishop is pretty good on the long diagonal. So the knight comes forward and the rook takes. This is because he wants to clear this square so that he has this whole diagonal just for this bishop. It's a greedy bishop. The knight is restricted by these pawns, right? The bishop could attack one of these pawns in the back. The knight decides to come forward. We got to complete our development somehow. Sometimes the knight even comes here to here so that you can play a6 and b5. But in this position, he decides to put the knight here. The knight could be heading to f6, but he'll probably move the queen first. Wow, he plays bishop f6. And white doesn't even exchange. White just plays the queen up. I think it's because if purple had moved the queen to the queen side, the queen would have been too far out of reach to defend, and white could have just played queen d2, bishop up, and had a really powerful attack. So here's a check. A rooks are exchanged. The other rook comes forward. So there was not an exchange of dark squared bishops. But this bishop is exerting some pressure, so that, for example, if the rook could come down here and the queen were gone, then it would be checkmate. Well, the knight would come here, and then it takes his checkmate. So he has good pressure on his opponent's king on the back rank. b4 is played, expanding. Just like in StarCraft, more bases is better. So let's see how purple decides to finish his development. So he plays b6 to solidify c5. The knight comes forward. Now these pieces are getting pretty dangerous, starting to think about different possible sacrifices on f7, for example, even on h7. But he doesn't have anything concrete yet, I don't think. But he's just trying to set it up. Bishop decides to come to this square in the center. It's pretty good on this square. It pins this pawn. Maybe that's the point of it. Maybe he was afraid this pawn was going forward, which is possible. And it's defended. It also defends this square. So it makes some sense. I could imagine white trying to attack f7 with, for example, queen f4. Decides to retreat the knight. Decides that the knight is misplaced, and purple plays his bishop back immediately, which I think is interesting. Oh, because it's attacked by the knight, and he has to keep it safe, and that's just the best square for it. So you might as well make the best move. Here we see this again. The queen does decide to come to f4, as I predicted. A few moves later. It's interesting to me that like if bishop exchange, I think the queens come off. And for some reason that favors white significantly, because he keeps playing for this. I mean, it favors purple. Because he's been playing with this by playing bishop f6. So now purple's down on time. He was up on time just a second ago. He was up 130 to 116. But now he's down pretty significantly, down 26 seconds. Really hard to think. Looks like he thinks that his position could collapse. So let's see if white starts to play a little bit quicker to try to flag his opponent. But white is thinking, white does decide to play this pawn up. He's going to try to create some weaknesses. If he can play pawn up again and take here so that it only takes once, then the bishop has the potential to sacrifice, creating large weaknesses in the on the white king so that sacrifices could be made. But he decides to take back with a pawn. Pretty good control of this square, and these squares are already weak because the bishop's gone. So white does have some potential for some sort of attack. Oh, this is a good move. Knight d2, that's going to e4, and then it's going to f6. And it's going to be really good on f6 because then you just play queen over and try to checkmate on h7. So purple decides that he needs to do something immediately, and so he actually sacrifices the pawn. This is a passed pawn. Pawns turn into queens. I've been trying to remind my viewers, pawns turn into queens. Queens are really good, so try to do that. There's a sacrifice played, and then the bishops are exchanged, then the queen takes. So the idea behind this is that purple's king is just too weak, and there'll be some sort of tactic. But I don't see it. Right? Like queen g4 check, you block with the queen. So he does decide to exchange, plays the rook up, gets in front of it. There's a check played. He doesn't take. Takes. Okay, so now he has these passed pawns. So white has some initiative, but he's probably worse. The knight and the king can probably stop these pawns. But maybe not. He's really got 4 pawns for the knight. Should be good. Let's see if he can continue to advance them, though. Plays f4. The knight moves. He defends the pawn. The rook comes out. There's a check played. King moves, and the rook goes back to defend this pawn. Pawn is moved up. The rook is able to take the pawn. See, this is what I was afraid of. I thought that maybe the pawns would start to fall. But really, the time factor is the most important factor. You can see the white has less time against 1 second, so that's the game. Really just about who can play faster in that position. All right, Grandmaster Lestri here to play one more game, and he is playing against Kato from Australia. So we have Spain against Australia. So Europe is logged onto the Internet Chess Club at this time. We see b3. The bishop is fianchetto. This bishop comes to this square. This is a semi-Slav type position. This triangle is really solid, pretty good as a defense against almost all of the queen pawn openings and the queen's bishop pawn openings. You can use this reliably. Anand plays the semi-Slav and things like that. So good structure to learn. Rook g1 is played. I like this move. The idea is to play g4, g5, kick the knight, and start an attack on the opponent's king. And I like attacking. That's why I like this move. So there's an exchange. He decides to play f4. The bishop's going to have to retreat somewhere. Now that the bishop retreats, we have g4. Yes, I love g4. But let's see if it works. The knight is forced to move, and now there's an exchange. So if this king had castled already on the queen side, that would be pretty good. But in this situation, he hasn't yet. g5 is played, though. The knight's going to have to move. He still controls e4 with the queen. You see that? So the knight has to go back, which is good. Pawn up, defended by the knight, and then pawn up. But now the pawn is pinned. It can't take because there's checkmate on g7. Oh, no, there isn't because it's not defended by the knight. So here, this pawn could fall. Oh my gosh, white's king looks really vulnerable. He attacks the rook, but it's not even clear that the rook is that important in this position. This king looks like trouble. I would have probably taken on h2. Possibly. No, you can't check on g3 because it would be taken by here. I was thinking you attack the rook moves, you check. Anyway, the bishop moves to e3. The rook moves up one square. Now the bishop takes here. This is a nasty bishop. There's too many weaknesses. He's going to have to try to queenside castle or something. This game, white's position has fallen apart. He decides to move his queen this way. I think he could have queenside castled. The knight moves to c7, and there's just checkmate.
A game of chess is like a sword fight. You must think first, right? Before you move.